It certainly sounded an awful lot like you were telling Susan Beisowitz to get lost.
No, it's not what I'm telling her at all, and I'm quite certain she wouldn't listen anyway.
Well, on the budget, it appears as though you've got a much more significant problem than you thought.
Yeah, we have about a 1% revenue problem compared to a 17% revenue problem that I inherited. Listen, I wish the economy was growing a little bit more rapidly. We got some number of days left, and we'll do everything we can to squeeze that what is basically a revenue problem down. We also have seen some increased expenditures, although we're going to live, I think, overall within our expenditure level. But we've seen some things come at us, particularly on the Medicaid side, that were greater than we thought they would be. It's one of the reasons that I've sent some changes to the Senate and the House, some changes that I think they needed to make even before we saw the rapid growth in some of the Medicaid expenses, particularly related to Leah. So that's what we're doing.
The way it is with the fluctuation of tax revenues and costs that you can't control, that any governor can't control. The idea of buttoning up a budget and saying that's it is just out the window, that you can't really do that?
Well, listen, 1% is what we're talking about on the revenue side. And I didn't extend the Leah benefit the way it was extended. That was done under my predecessor. But the reality is that we need some checks and balances in that program. Looking back to the debate about offering Leah, it obviously exceeded everyone's projections by quite a bit. So, but I want to be as clear as you can be with 60 days left in the year that this is by and large a revenue problem, and we're missing revenue targets by about 1%, 1.1%.
Well, how does that affect some of the spending that you want to do? Is it going to affect some of the programs that you're wanting to fund, and will you have to consider increasing revenue next year?
No, I don't think we have to consider increasing revenue. I'd like to see a little more growth in the economy. Now, listen, there's some good things that are happening out there. There has not been as much gasoline in storage in the United States at this time of year since the 1990s. Gas prices peaked about April 25th, April 23rd. So we're seeing prices come down. Normally they don't peak to Memorial Day. Last year they peaked after July 4th. So I think we're going to see some decline and hopefully rebuild some confidence in the consumers in Connecticut. We may even be seeing some of that. So there's ways to go. But the reality is, yeah, we're going to make some cuts and make some recommendations and live within the money that we raise.
But where's that going to come, though? Is it going to come from some of the education plans you have?
I don't have an answer for you today. But we will very quickly be proposing that. As far as next year's budget, that's been in flux anyway. Adjustments we had made about $130 million in cuts in that budget. We'd also then asked for some additional expenses. We'll go back and we'll sit down with the Appropriations Committee and we'll work all of that out.
Any increase in taxes?
I said right here. No, we're not increasing taxes.
The ERN's a gimmick, as the Republicans have claimed.
I'm sorry?
Is using the money that...
No, I don't think so. I think listen, for Republicans to lecture me on what is or is not an appropriate way to balance the budget. Listen, I didn't run up a structural deficit of $3.6 billion. I didn't spend every dollar that was in the cookie jar. I didn't use every ARA dollar to displace state spending. What I'm trying to do is make a target. Now, on a revenue side, I'm going to miss the target by about 1.1%. That's where we are. And using appropriate tools to close that gap on a budget basis and ultimately on a gap basis is what we're going to try to do.
Isn't spending cuts harder, though?
Spending cuts are hard. They always are. Change is hard. Listen, you try living my life and telling people they have to change. I mean, look at the pushback I got on Leah before people actually understood the problem. So change is hard. I understand that.
Address yourself to the message that the Republicans are putting out, which is we are right back where we started despite a $1.5 billion tax increase.
Well, apparently it wasn't $1.5 billion. So, so let's be very clear, you know. And again, it's a 1% miss. I'll admit that. But 1% revenue problem versus what was a 17% revenue problem is really probably, it's not yet a year. So it's, you know, it's a good 10 months work.
But I mean, you know what their
we'll
claim is. You said you were going to fix it, and it's not fixed 100%,
it's
so
not.
you failed.
Well, I think that's ultimately up to people to decide. I think the failure in Connecticut's most recent history is the building of a $3.6 billion structural deficit, which you're absolutely right, I was hired to solve. What did we do? We cut expenses. We restructured our relationship with our employees. There's an independent report showing on OPEB benefits that we're saving $11 billion. There'll be additional reports that will document further savings. We're going to pre-fund, or excuse me, we're going to appropriately fund our pensions that'll save us another $5 to $7 billion. It's not a bad year's work, but I wish, you know, we didn't have a 1% revenue problem.
But you pushed the legislature into approving things that are fiscally sound over the long term. I'm talking about the pension changes and GAP, but have no political payout in the short term to people who are running this year. So what do you say to a Democratic legislator who says, geez, Governor, you kind of put us in a bad spot here?
Mark, first of all, I just reject what you just said. To go from a $3.6 billion structural deficit, that is no money to spend it, to missing a revenue target by 1% is pretty darn good. We had the largest per capita deficit of all of the 50 states in the nation. We've winnowed that down to a 1% miss, 1.1% miss on revenue. And now this is some of the things that we did. We're properly funding our pensions. We restructured our relationship with our state employees to save $20 billion over 20 years. We'll save another $5 to $7 billion by funding those pensions. We changed the relationship with our state employees, so much so that new employees will not qualify for seniority payments or longevity payments. I mean, how many things do you want me to have them run on? They got a full docket of things to run on top of which we had our two best back-to-back month of hiring in the state. In the first 2 months of the year, you'd have to go back to the 1990s to see back-to-back months like that. So I think there's a lot of things people can run on. Last question.
Governor, Tony Walker
Sure.
yesterday said the budget puts the education bill in the weeds for next year. How much is the budget situation driving that bill versus education issues?
Not at all. Listen, I've been saying let's get the budget, let's get the package in place, and let's decide how much money we can put in. There's still a lot of money. I think listen, education needs to be our priority. When you live in a city with a school district of 21,000 kids, and you have to look as kids get on the bus and say 45% of you are never going to graduate from high school, you know you got a problem. So let's concentrate on what the problem is. It may momentarily be how much money we have. Let's set the priority on education, period. Okay, thanks.
Nothing's going to affect that, in other words.
Listen, you know, negotiating a budget to getting to a final amount was always part of what we had to do, no matter what these numbers were. All right, but whether that's a basis to not move forward on an educational reform package, the answer has to categorically be no. 45% of the kids in Hartford will not graduate. 40% of the kids in New Haven will not graduate. 47% of the kids in Bridgeport will not graduate with a high school diploma. If we don't change, we will continue to have between 45 and 70% of all of our students going to our community colleges and our 4 state universities who graduate from Connecticut schools with diplomas having to take remedial courses. It's unacceptable. That's the most important thing we have to get done right now, and we need to move forward. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.